auto sequence start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is Out of Bounds, two guys talking sports and astrology. You're listening to Wayne Moody and Mark Lerner.
Just going to give a little intro here, and then I'm going to send the microphone back to you to discuss a little bit about what out of bounds is in sports as you've experienced it, and also what out of bounds means in astrology. So what I just wanted to say at the outset, many of you may know Wayne from Welcome to Planet Earth and all of his work with astrolocality, or what is officially called astrocartography, with a registration R in a circle for the whole history of all of that. We go back to Welcome to Planet Earth, the magazine, actually newspaper and magazine that I started publishing back in 1981, and that's how we first connected. And we've learned over the last couple of years, we've had these dialogues which allowed us to sort of open the door to this concept of out of bounds, two guys talking sports and astrology, because we both love sports so much throughout our lives, and we got into astrology many decades ago, and then we were both part of Welcome to Planet Earth, and we've been sharing the last couple of years. But right now, today, okay, so that people know, this is August 7th, a Sunday, 2022, and we're both on the West Coast, I think I can say that, and what's amazing is Sagittarius, which is a key sign related to sports, is rising, where both of us live. And I just noticed, just so that you know this, Brother Wayne, and for the audience, all the planets, from Mars outward to Pluto, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they're all under the horizon. The Sun and Mercury are up in the elevated area of what we call the ninth house. Venus is in the eighth house. We also have Pallas Athena in Gemini in the seventh house. And the moon is about to rise in the sign of Sagittarius. So in many ways, I find this to be really in sync, particularly with the astrology cosmic calendar that originally was part of Welcome to Planet Earth 41 years ago and is now an app, the Astrology Cosmic Calendar with a K. So in case you want to tune into that. The other thing I just wanted to say is that yesterday, Wayne sent me a whole bunch of stuff about out of bounds, this concept, particularly when certain planets, he will explain it in a moment a little bit more accurately and better than I am saying it right now. But it has to do when any planet, or it could be the moon, move past a certain area of what we call how far the sun goes in its northern climb during part of the year, and then there's a southern movement of the sun as well. And so any planet or celestial body that moves past this particular area, which is, as far, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 23 degrees and 26 minutes north of going north or going south. And this is from the celestial equator, by which we calculate what are called usually declination, planets moving north and south. So let me throw it back to you, whatever you want to say about it, and then we'll go wherever we want to go.
All right, Mark. Yeah, let me set the table first and get to what we're talking about. Again, there is a cultural understanding of out of bounds that most people are familiar with. At least they would recognize it if it were shared with them. If you're interested in sports and you are playing tennis and you hit the ball outside of the lines, you're out of bounds. If you are a basketball player and you step out of the court, you're out of bounds. If you're a football player and you catch the ball outside of the lines on the sidelines, you're out of bounds. So, there's a lot of reference to out of bounds in our culture. Now, the astrologer and the astronomer see it differently. as Mark explained, you have this Tropic of Capricorn and Tropic of Cancer description, which is a fact that is derived from a man-made pattern system that's placed over the Earth. We call them our latitude and our longitudes. But what the Earth is actually doing in its year cycle is it's tilted at an axis at an angle of 23 degrees and 26 minutes at its extreme in the winter and in the summertime in the northern and southern hemispheres. So this tilt of the Earth is the line that we are factually interested in, and here is an explanation of it straight from an online source. Out of bounds planets involve two dynamics: the declination and the ecliptic, which Mark just mentioned. And the ecliptic is the apparent path of the sun in its yearly motion across the sky. Now, we know in reality that it's not the sun that is moving, but Earth is orbiting around the sun. So the ecliptic is actually the plane of Earth's orbit around the sun. So those images that you've seen from grade school on up that show the solar system, and they show Earth's place in that solar system, and it looks like the planets are arranged in a way that reminds you of the planet Saturn. Well, that's the ecliptic. And so when we look at the astrological way of looking at this, we speak of astrological coordinates. For example, today the moon is at 17 degrees right now as we are talking, 17, 18 degrees of Sagittarius. So we're giving that planet's position in a Earth-centric celestial longitude. So this measure is part of the ecliptic, the larger orbit of the Earth around the sun, but it's also related to the Earth's own equator. So the measure is part of the ecliptic coordinate system. It's the planet's distance along the ecliptic as a reference point.
Right.
So, the declination is the angular distance of a heavenly body north or south of the celestial equator. So from a Earth-centered perspective, when you look up in the sky, and this is what sailors learned to do, it's a trick they learned to do with the sextant a long time ago. This was at the very beginning of navigation and map making. And so they knew that every single night during the course of the year that a planet or a star would be in a certain prescribed place. And the stars were fixed and the planets were moving. So what they would do is they would shoot the celestial body, whatever planet or whatever star, and in the case of the sun, it would be the sun. And they would get the angle, and then they would go to their little reference books like we astrologers and our ephemeris. And they would go to their book and they would say on such a date of the calendar year, where should that planet be? And they would get the declination. So declination is a fact in science, and it's a why, a philosophy, a correspondent. It's a meaningful value in astrology. And that's how the two, in my view, marry together. Mark, you have anything to add to that?
Oh, yeah. I just want to throw something in there and then go back to you. Okay. Because I definitely want you, even though what you shared yesterday, which Wayne will describe. I want Wayne to get into this because it has to do with a particular planet, which is the traditional planet of, used to be agriculture, thinking of Mars, the planet that rules over our spring times, actually has a lot to do with planting seeds. You go back into ancient astrology, and it's like one of the things about Mars is it rules agriculture and so many other things, but traditionally a planet of war, assertiveness, courage, bravery, sports in particular. Except we will get into all of these things later, like the works of Michel Gauquelin and his wife, proving astrology when they tried to disprove it using planets like Mars rising or above and so on. But what I want to, okay, Wayne's going to get into all that. Let me just throw one thing in, because Wayne just gave a fantastic introduction. So what happened yesterday, and this is what keeps happening between Brother Wayne and myself, more often than not, we're kind of reading each other's minds. Maybe because we have so much background that we didn't even know. We both worked for an organization called, if I could say this,
Wait, brothers from another mother.
Well, Wayne spent many years in Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. Okay, the United States, being born there. We'll get into all these in future sessions. I'm born in New York City. So those two cities are so close together. We were even talking 2 hours ago about the weather patterns and saying, the rainstorms in Philadelphia, well, we have them in New York, very similar. Now, meanwhile, what I wanted to bring up here is, and this is where Wayne is going to go, and then I will come in with something else, something that happened back around 1995 when a certain book arrived. I don't want to forget that. So toward the end here, it's more of a minor thing, but a personal thing that happened in my life.
I'll remind you, 1995.
Okay. Yeah, when I got a book called Astrology Really Works, and I'll explain a little bit about that. But at any rate, what Wayne shared yesterday, and I was on to the same thing a couple of months ago, and then after Wayne shared this, it has to do with the planet Mars. Mars is one of these planets that frequently goes out of bounds. And that's the interesting thing, because Mars is such a dynamic energy. In a sense, it rules over the entire zodiac. We now have like an International Astrologers Day. It never existed before, which is the first day of spring in the Northern Hemisphere, is now being called International Astrology Day. And that's when the sun goes into Aries and Mars rules that sign. So Mars has so much to do with beginnings. It rules Aries, the first sign of the 12 signs, and so on. But Mars is one of these planets that frequently goes further north in declination than the sun, beyond 23 degrees and 26 minutes north, or 23 minutes, 26 degrees south. And I'll have some other comments on that later. However, what I also want to bring up is the moon frequently does this every month, I think every single month. It's often, I think, when the moon is in Sagittarius, which happens to be my own moon sign. But depending on wherever it is, the moon usually twice a month will go past this area by a degree or two, sometimes a little further. And the other thing I want to tell you, in case you didn't know this, Brother Wayne, as well as the world community, in the ephemeris that both of us have, this is a printed ephemeris from ACS Publications back in New Hampshire, and they're the ones who've been printing the Neil Mickelson American Ephemeris, fantastic research that we now have with information from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, way different than the days of Nostradamus and hundreds of years ago, and they didn't even know about the other, the outer planets and Chiron and so on, the asteroids. At any rate, we both have the 10-year cycle from 2020 to 2030. And I was looking at the next couple of years to see so many times that Mars is going to be out of bounds. But you know what? Pallas Athena, one of the main asteroids, you talk about a celestial body that not only is whacked out north and south, sometimes extremely, to even like 50-plus degrees north or south, and its latitude also, even Ceres, the largest asteroid. So I just wanted to say that to the audience. It isn't only Mars. Venus will frequently do it, but not by too much beyond the 23. I saw also Mercury is going to do it a little bit. So now the stage is back to you. Tell us and everybody more about what happened yesterday, your research from 1907.
Okay, so, in preparation for these moments that we're sharing here, I thought, well, let me go and check the record. Mars is very important for me. I do not have it out of bounds in my birth chart. I have Venus out of bounds, birth chart. But Mars is a real player in the world when it's out of balance. And so I wanted to find examples of this. I thought to myself, well, I know that the Mars effect is something that Michel and Francois Gauquelin established. These are two French PhDs from the Sorbonne who established what they call the Mars effect. And they determined in a scientific way that there's validity to Mars placements in the horoscope. So I have Mars in my ninth house, and they have this idea about angular Mars, in other words, being in the ninth, the 12th, first, fourth, and the seventh houses of the horoscope.
Right.
So when you have planets that are on the angles, their value, what they mean, is supposed to influence or show itself during the course of your life. So I have Mars in my ninth house, and Mars is supposed to be the mark of the athlete, for one, or a military man. And not so much the military, but very, very much so the athlete. And so Michel and Francois gathered all these famous athletes from Europe, Europe, because it's got Catholicism, and they baptize people. They usually have the birth times, and so you're able to get accurate charts. And so they got together a whole lot of charts, and they demonstrated that it was beyond coincidence, beyond the odds, that a person born with Mars in the angular house would be a famous, in whatever country he was in, athlete. And and the demonstrations held up and got tested by different scientific communities around the world, back to Mars by declination. So I thought to myself the other day, well, let me look and see if I can find any famous American athletes who, men and women, who had Mars in great declination in their birth chart. So my favorite guy who I wanted to look at was, because he's about to have his Mars return in his horoscope, was Jim Thorpe. And the reason I thought, well, maybe, and Mark and I do this a lot. We go on a hunch. Well, this trail seems to be leading somewhere, so let me follow it to the next, maybe logical step. And so it turns out that he has Mars in Taurus, and Mars is in Taurus, and his Mars is going to be returning, and it will return in a few more days. And so that's the first coincidence. Now, is there anything else going on with Jim Thorpe that might be of interest to me? Well, he didn't have Mars out of bounds, but what he did have was a history of having done something extraordinary when Mars was way, 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 way out of bounds in 1907. And in 1907, that's when the youngster who was to become the famous Jim Thorpe first showed his colors to the public. And who did he show his colors to but one of the most famous coaches in American history? And tell me if I've got it right, Mark. That's Branch Rickey, right?
Well, that I don't know. Branch Rickey, eventually he, was in the St. Louis, baseball team, and then with the Dodgers with Jackie Robinson for Branch Rickey. But I think you may be referring to a different person. But you brought up. You brought up not so much the coach, but you brought up the fact that he played against a young Dwight Eisenhower in a football game. Yes. Oh
yeah. Okay, so coach aside, and I'll correct that if it'll come to me. So many facts we're trying to hold in our heads, and we go back and forth on this all the time, Mark.
Yeah.
So here he is. He's not an athlete yet, he's going to the Carlisle School for Native Americans to try to make them into good Americans. Carlisle is just down the road from Philadelphia, which is where I went to school and where my parents were born. And he goes to Franklin Field. Well, this is eventually, but what he does is he's just this guy who his father taught him how to hunt and taught him how to live out in the wilderness and how to be a sportsman and how to enjoy fishing and all this kind of stuff. So he becomes this natural, developed athlete. And after running away from home a couple times, his father dying, and eventually he ends up at Carlisle. And while at Carlisle, he sees these guys on the track and field doing high jump. So what he does is, and he's in shoes, I guess, and pants, and he walks over and he beats all of them. And then he proceeds to beat them in every other thing that they do, whether it be the 100-yard dash or the long jump. He's a natural athlete. Well, this natural athlete ends up at the Penn Relays, University of Pennsylvania, Franklin Field in Philadelphia, Penn Relays, where he demolishes the field in all of those events. He's just
so
Go ahead,
so
Mark. He's what you call a phenom.
Yeah, and so this brings back what you said in the very beginning about out of bounds, where Brother Wayne gave examples. You didn't give the example of a foul ball in baseball, my favorite sports area. But you gave, there's also soccer. But you started with tennis, and then there's golf. Every sport has a thing. We'll get into this another time. Yeah, we will get into this on another level in a future thing where we talk about the difference. Going back to this is how we always do this thing, folks. George Carlin, the difference between the field general, what is football, march down the field, and all this, the armored thing, and all the sort of tough talk about football, the padding and the throwing the aerial assault versus the whole goal of baseball is to go home, go home.
And Mark, every American breathes this stuff in. Male, female, whatever age, you breathe this stuff in. You hear it around you. It's the common vernacular. It's the parlance. It's what the culture is. What's the culture is writing in the newspapers. And so these references, whether they be by the average person or be by politicians, they are very much a part of the world externally, but internally, and this is where we're going with this. In 1907, Jim Thorpe discovering him, and he began his famous career as a world-class athlete. In fact, he's anointed the greatest athlete in the world by the King of Sweden at the Olympics, eventually. But on the road, in route to becoming this famous athlete at the 1912 Olympics, in 1911, he plays a game against the Army Academy, and
that brings in Mars again. Now, I wanted to say this one thing and let you get back. Notice, folks, we haven't even talked about the guy's birthday. We're not looking at his sun sign. That's why, in a sense, the out-of-bounds concept, and Wayne and I have done this, a couple of dozen times, maybe like 40 or 50 times the last couple of years. We never recorded it. And by the way, when you're done with this little segment, I have a surprise for you because I have the chart of Pennsylvania from our good friend Mark Penfield's Horoscopes of the Western Hemisphere, and I want to throw that at you. And I also have, this book was just sitting nearby. It's not Wayne's book, which is War Impulse Pattern. By the way, this is going to be part of GPS Astrology, which is launching at the full moon, Out of Bounds. It'll also be on Google or Apple and all these other places as a podcast. So we don't even know where it's going to go. But you go ahead with what you're saying here, and then I want to bring up Pennsylvania and the Gokalan book that just happened to be here. Okay, go back to what you're saying. Sorry to interrupt.
So back to Jim Thorpe. in 1907, what distinguished that year was it was a year when Mars was way, way, way out of bounds at 28 South 54.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Now that's not that doesn't match up against the asteroids, but for a planet in our solar system, that is extreme. The only other body that gets that extreme is the moon.
Right.
And
exactly.
So here we have 1907, the year of his emergence into the sports world, like a meteorite, sort of like Mark Twain's meteor. Samuel Clemens.
Halley's Comet.
Halley's Comet, yeah.
Sagittarius sun, he comes in with Halley's Comet. Years later, somebody actually says to him, you came in with Halley's Comet, Mark. What do you think? He says, I expect to go out with it. And when it came back, because it's a periodic comet, 75 years later, that's when he died.
That's when he died. So Jim Thorpe didn't match that particular feat. Yeah. But what he did, by coming out as a phenom in 1907, was he literally captured the sports world. You name a sport, baseball. You name a sport, football. You name a sport, track and field. He was in it, and he dominated. And so that year, there were some other things that occurred that would that you would put an asterisk next to because it was so amazing, and it was Mars-like. Now, what's Mars-like mean? Mars rules man. Men are from Mars, and women are from Venus. Mars is the Roman god of war.
Right.
The Greek equivalent is Ares in Homer's the Iliad and the Odyssey, and so you have this is not a made up thing for recent consumption. This has been around millennium. This goes back into many cultures over thousands of years. Mars, the idea of a Mars, the red planet, and so when you look at what it means, it's connected to men, to strength, to violence, to blood, to war, and to all these other things. It's also connected to some very positive things, like, of course, you need your blood to live. And, of course, you need strength and energy in order to operate in the world. That's why we have physical bodies. And Mars is those concepts of energy and power and empowerment.
Hey, can I throw something in before you go on? And then
throw in.
Obviously, this has never happened before during our discussions because I am traveling more than Brother Wayne. And I will tend to call him when I'm traveling. And he is wherever he is, tending to some beautiful flowers, doing what he's doing, and I'm doing what I'm doing. So I just pulled up, because I'm sitting in front of my computer. Again, I said a few moments ago, we're not even talking sun sign. But guess what, folks? Mercury, he is born, you said, as Mars is about to come back, which is in the next couple of days. Mars at 25 of Taurus, conjuncting Mercury at 25 of Taurus, conjuncting the moon. This is an exact chart, or fairly exact, 6:30 in the morning, May 22nd, 1887, in, of all names, Prague, like the city in Czechoslovakia. Wayne and I are always going back and forth about war years. Prague, Oklahoma. And Neptune. So a quadruple series of planets. And earlier today, just remember where you were at. Earlier today, we were talking about what's called the nuclear axis. We'll get into that another time, that I worked on years ago, one of my pet projects. And I was telling Wayne, oh, by the way, in the nuclear axis from the nuclear chain reaction in Chicago in December of 1942, the Enrique Fermi event of splitting the atom and controlling it, I said to him, by the way, the moon was conjunct Neptune. Jim Thorpe has moon conjunct Neptune within 2 degrees. And these 4 celestial bodies, aside from having Sun and Pluto and Gemini, there's so many things that we could talk about in a future thing about him. But I just wanted the folks to know that this is going on. And one other thing from numerology, the guy was born on the 22nd of the month. And if you're into numerology, people who are born on the 11th or the 22nd, just the day, that puts them into what numerologists often consider master numbers. At least there's, souls coming in and incarnating on an 11-day or on a 22-day. Very powerful. So the guy has this athletic combination of Mars with Mercury and muscles and movement with the moon, personality, which is so much of who we really are deep down inside. And then you add on Neptune, and that's not even the whole chart. That's just one little segment. And it's the first Earth sign of physical prowess. Back to you.
Back to me. And, to pick up on that, so what happened? 1907, that's connected to energy, empowerment, and violence, and all the rest. Well, it seems significant that was the maiden voyage of the Lusitania.
Wow.
Seems significant that's when Teddy Roosevelt, appointed an engineer to build the Panama Canal. It seems to be important that was the year that the energy state, the oil state, Oklahoma, achieved its statehood. I mean, there were things clustered around that year, 1907, that, we live our lives. Jim Thorpe was living his life in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and he was practicing sports at Franklin Field in Philadelphia. Yeah. By the way, there's a connection to me because I played in a championship game on Franklin Field, and I also went to the Penn Relays. But
hey, wait! I got to throw in the fact that from summer camp, I scored 2 points under the rim at Madison Square Garden when I was a kid. Back to you.
Under the rim?
Yeah, I was standing under the rim. I was actually tall in those days. I'm not very tall in regular life at this point, but as a kid, I was 10 years old, and in the middle of a New York Knicks game against whoever it was, we came out and played 5 minutes, and I got a basket at Madison Square Garden. Okay, but your accolades go way beyond mine. So at some point, you'll explain all of that to everybody.
Oh, hey. Not comparing, brother, not comparing. Anyway, it's the coincidences, the challenges. Hey, how could I have forgotten this? The coach was Pop Warner.
Oh yeah. You threw in Branch Rickey, which was great because that gives me the baseball lead where I brought back the out of bounds of a foul ball. And Branch Rickey opened the door to changing the color line by going from the St. Louis Cardinals, where he created the farm system in baseball. That's what he was famous for. And then he brought in Jackie Robinson in 1947.
Hey, you know what? And, audience, it's funny how all of this stuff, the way we bounce around like a pinball machine, it connects. It connects.
Our minds, it's just like yesterday, folks. And this is 2 weeks, 2 Saturdays in a row. Maybe there's something going on with Saturday connected to Saturn traditionally and Sunday to the sun. Because we don't often, have these discussions on Sunday. But this happened also the week before, which we'll get into about GPS astrology and the launch coming up at the full moon, where Brother Wayne sends me all this information. And again, you'll learn more about this, the global positioning satellites. And on the cover of what's going to be coming out in a couple of days, GPS Astrology magazine, that Brother Wayne will be in, and I'll be in, and so many other astrologers and non-astrologers. It's a tour de force by my daughter designing it, Katya Lerner. So we're thrilled to see that happening. Out of Bounds is going to be in there. But what I wanted to say was you started sending me a week ago Saturday, before the thing from yesterday about Jim Thorpe. And the week before, on that Saturday, I wake up and I see all of these references to the orbits of where our satellites are, Arthur C. Clarke. And I had been doing the whole thing independent of you the night before. And then the next morning I wake up and you're sending me these connections online about satellites and where all these global positioning satellites are and how the whole system got set up. And this is part of your article in GPS Astrology, correct?
Correct. Nothing is, there's nothing new under the sun. That's all I got to say. Nothing new under the sun. And people are connected. The only reason we're not connected is because we block stuff. And so when you know that expression, I guess it came out of the 60s, out of my generation, to flow, to be in the flow, right. I mean, to catch a wave, all of these, I mean, our language is purposeful. Our language used to have lots of good verbs in it. Flowing was verb, to catch a wave, that's a verb, and the language dies when your verbs die. So,
let me throw you back to Pennsylvania, because just so you know, folks, Wayne Moody has worked in the field of, I can say astrocartography, as long as we imagine that we're putting a little letter R around the circle. Remember the whole thing in the beginning with Jim Lewis and Michael Erlewine? And if people are going to use the term astrocartography, it's a registered trademark, right? So exactly. I am hesitant often to use the word anywhere because I don't want to infringe on anybody. That's me. I've been from Michigan State University when I first started writing and editing back when I was 19 and 20 years old. I'm a stickler for words and, proofreading and editing and so on. I've done this for 52 years now. But here I want to tell you something that's so amazing. And this is only happening, folks, because I'm sitting at home where we're actually able to record this whole thing. So page 194 of Horoscopes of the Western Hemisphere by Mark Penfield, who used to write for Welcome Planet Earth. And he was somebody, whether we agree with him or not, who did what's called rectification, a very tricky thing. Not every modern astrologer does it, and who knows whether it's totally correct. And I don't always agree with Mark Penfield, but he wrote for Welcome to Planet Earth. He put this amazing book together. So I got to tell you this is a mind-blowing thing. And part of the reason I want to share this is Brother Wayne with his book, War Impulse Pattern, and his work in Welcome to Planet Earth and his own blog and everything else, which you'll discover in GPS Astrology. He has mastered the U.S. birth chart from July 4th, 1776, just to acknowledge Barry Lyons, one of our colleagues who was with me at the very beginning. He was not really an astrologer, and he did meticulous work to help figure out, based on Thomas Jefferson's diaries and the work of the great Dane Rudjar, on July 4th, 1776, the beginning of the United States as a Declaration of Independence. So Wayne in particular, and myself also through Welcome Planet Earth, work with a very particular chart. Wayne will share more about that in the future. However, Wayne also has focused a lot on the Constitution, the starting of the U.S. Constitution, which was also, both of these events were in Philadelphia, which is, again, where Wayne lived, went to school, and so on. So the thing is, Pennsylvania has a birth chart, and just so you all know, each state of the Union, and this is an important thing, when I do consultations with people, I will often say, hey, how long have you been living in Pennsylvania? How long have you been living in New York, Oregon? Because each state has a chart, because astrology is the whole art, oracle, science, whatever you want to call it, tool of beginning moments. We're all born at a moment of time, right? So a chart for any beginnings, including today, which is why I gave out some of that information, what's in the sky. Pennsylvania, December 12, 1787, approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. So get this. Wayne, Sun, 20 of Sagittarius, where the moon right now is making its monthly connection over the next hour or two. That only happens every 27 days. A retrograde Mercury. Hello, folks. That's my soapbox, complaining about how so many astrologers make Mercury the poster boy for retrograde. Well, good old Pennsylvania, the home of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, among so many other things. Mercury at 10 of Sagittarius, which is connected to what we call the nuclear axis from December 2nd, 1942. The North Node, 26 of Sagittarius, the galactic center. You'll also love this. Saturn is returning for Pennsylvania. That only happens every 29 years. Saturn is at 24 of Aquarius, having 3 returns, and that's the moon placement for the U.S. And two more little things that you'll find fascinating, Wayne. Jupiter's position, retrograde, at 21 plus of Gemini, which is the United States Mars degree. And Mars is conjunct Uranus in the Pennsylvania chart, both retrograde, late in the sign of Cancer, very close to the United States Mercury. Now, that we've never done this kind of thing, which is recorded. We're at access to a book and to the computer while we're having one of these discussions. Back to you.
And Mark, that horoscope that Penfield would have rectified would not have changed those facts. If those planets still would have been on the U.S. Mars. They still would have been where they were.
Right. And by the way, as long as we're on the subject of the book, Cosmic Influences, I don't know if this is the original one, but I have right in front of me Dr. Michel Gauquelin to give him another piece of credit, because what we're talking about here with Out of Bounds, the idea of both in sports, you reach a certain point, and guess what? There's a referee, there are rules. Hey, your foot was on the line, it was off the line. Look, this is creating a lot of frustration now. Major League Baseball, people, they now have the umpires all congregating. Was it a fair ball? Was it a foul ball?
All you need to do, Mark, all we need to do is reflect back on the playoffs in the NFL last year.
Right.
And all those calls the referees were making on the sidelines.
And all the crowds, oh no, not again. We just want the game to. Why do they have to keep interfering? And then the other thing is, some of these things that have happened completely changes who wins the Super Bowl. In baseball with the 7-game World Series, I remember Kansas City was playing St. Louis, just to pull out something, because I often watch some of these old things. There was an umpire made a call in the 6th game. This is when the Kansas City Royals were playing the St. Louis Cardinals. And I believe, if I remember correctly, it was at first base, and the guy called the runner, I think it was the Kansas City Royals, safe, but he was out, okay? They went on to make this rally. They scored all these runs in the 6th game, and Kansas City won the World Series. Now, St. Louis, who we brought up before with Brand Tricky and the farm system, is one of the great teams in the National League, okay? But the Kansas City Royals had never won a world championship at that particular point. That was the key, and it all happened, and the umpire regretted it for his whole life, because this one point of whether the guy had
Did he leave the country, Mark?
No, but the whole thing, no, he didn't leave the country. And there are other things we'll bring up. And some of this becomes very sad. There's another whole thing of a player who ended his whole life because of one pitch. We'll talk about that another time, playing for the, at that time, California Angels, who were about to go into the 1986 World Series. They were one strike away in their home park of defeating Boston. We'll get into that another time. And they wound up, Boston rallied. They went into the 1986 World Series against the Mets. Then they almost beat the Mets with like the bottom of the ninth. And then the Mets made this miracle comeback in extra innings. Talk about extra innings too.
Mark, let me pinball off of what you're talking about right now. The baseball. You know, besides looking up Jim Thorpe, I thought, well, let me look in, and because I knew I was going to be talking to you, Mark. I said, let me look up some baseball facts and find some really weird fact or something that is like totally, inexplicable and so rare.
Yeah.
And I found 4 guys who, at the first at-bats in Major League Baseball, they hit a home run off of the first pitch. I found 4 guys. And
one of them, wait. Is Bert Campaneris one of those? He had 2 home runs.
No. It's got to be the first at-bat, and it's got to be the first pitch.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay? And so the last guy was this guy, Daniel Nava.
Okay.
And he was born in 1983.
Okay, that's amazing. First pitch.
Okay, and then there's the next guy. He was the latest, the 4th one. The 3rd guy was this guy named Kuzminov.
Okay, never heard of him.
Kevin Kuzminov. He was born in 1981. And then there was this guy named Jeremy Hermida, and he played for the Marlins, and he was born in 1984. And then going way back to 1874 was the first guy, a guy named Duggleby, Bill Duggleby. And anyway, so I said, let me look up their birth information. They gave all their birth information and run the charts, and I didn't have time. I didn't necessarily need them, and see if any of them have an out-of-bounds Mars in particular. And so for the first guy, the guy Duggleby, he had no out of bounds planets. Okay, and nothing distinguished his chart to make me think, oh well, let me figure this out and let me conjecture that he might have done it because he's a Sun Sag conjunct his Mars or something like that. No. The second guy who played for the Marlins, who did it in 2005 on August 31st. We're coming up to that anniversary. He had his moon out of bounds.
Okay.
And this was his first at bat. He was brought up as a pinch hitter, and out of the minors. And then the third guy, his first at bat was September 2nd, 2006, and he had his moon out of bounds. But his moon was way, way out of bounds, 28 plus 28 in 42 minutes. And that was that guy, Kevin Kuzminoff, and I believe he played for, no, he didn't play for Boston. He played for a New York team. Now, the fourth guy, the most recent guy, played for Boston. And his name, again, Daniel Nava, N-A-V-A. And he did it June 12th, 2010. Now, he has his moon out of bounds. And on the day that he hit his home run, he had a lunar return. His moon was in Gemini.
Well, let me break in there for a second, because today the moon is out of bounds in Sagittarius. Remember I said I didn't know, but often it is. And I was born with the moon in Sagittarius out of bounds as well. And I also realized, and I hadn't focused on this, that I have Uranus and Pluto a little bit out of bounds. So literally, as we're talking today, folks, the moon in the sign Sagittarius, traditionally, a Jupiter-ruled sign that often represents, I guess the best way to put it, I mean, we know that it relates to horseback riding. It relates to the centaur, half human, half horse. This is beyond the discovery of Chiron in 1977, but just traditionally. So the whole idea of long-distance journeys and travel and all that with Sagittarius. So as Wayne said earlier, the two most common ones we're going to find, are Mars, at least as we're talking, and related particularly to sports, as well as everything that Mars rules in astrology. And the moon is doing this a lot. And that's why, from memory, for whatever reason, I believe that the moon goes out of bounds more often in Sagittarius. And I'm not sure, I can't prove this, I'd have to look it up. But you just said about that, about one of these persons having a moon out of bounds, did you not? Right? In Gemini?
I said that the last guy, the guy who hit the ball in 2010, his first at-bat home run, first pitch, he had his moon in late Gemini,
out of bounds.
And it was out of bounds, but it wasn't way, way out of bounds. Now, the third guy, going back because I misspoke myself, out of these four men, one guy had Mars out of bounds. One.
Okay.
And then three of the guys had the moon out of bounds. And one guy had nothing out of bounds. So anyway, that was an interesting way for me to apply the theory to practice. Yeah. Anyway, back to you, Mark.
Let me throw a couple other things into this mix here. Yogi Berra, ain't over till it's over. It gets late early out there, it's deja vu all over again, and so on. By the way, for 17 years, I did, as some of you know, what I often call humorously rip-off calendars, but it allowed me to publish Welcome to Planet Earth. It was extra income from 1985 to 2000 from a company called Workman Publishing. So I did 12 sun sign calendars each day, 365 entries, and I did it for 17 years. That company, Workman Publishing out of New York, where, of course, Yogi Berra played it with the New York Yankees, with Mickey Mantle, all these other players in the 50s and 60s. He actually started Yogi Berra. Well, first of all, his book of yogiisms was published by Workman. So this is like 6 degrees distance from Yogi Berra to me, and growing up and loving Yogi Berra and Mickey Mantle, these players. By the way, speaking of birthing points, and I did put Yogi Berra, when the previous president was impeached, one of the representatives from New York I was watching TV and I was working on Yogi's chart, which is in one of my podcasts. I have a Mark Lerner Astrology Radio Astroscope to publicize some more of my stuff at greatbearenterprises.com. We now have 100 podcasts. A bunch of podcasts ago, I put Yogi Berra's chart in there because of the Yogi Berraisms. And the night I was working on this thing, one of those impeachment trials was going on, and on TV, this is like simultaneously, just like Wayne and I do, right? Synchronistically, we might say, according to the Jungian term. So I'm working on Yogi's chart, and I want to put it in there, and I'm about ready to do a recording about Yogi Berra. And this congressman who is part of the, anti-former president team with the impeachment is being interviewed. He's asked a couple of questions, right, about what is going on, the intricacies of presenting this case in Congress. And I go in the other room, and he says, as Yogi Berra once said, it ain't over till it's over. This is while I'm in the other room working on the Yogi chart, right? So this kind of synchronicity, whether it's in the ethers or whatever, and I'm just like flabbergasted.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why is this happening?
Don't you love it when that happens?
Well, again, for instance, right in front of me, I don't want to forget about this thought. I have, like Wayne does, we both have a library of books. We've been doing this for dozens of years. I've sold so many books. I have a whole bunch of books that I have in boxes in the garage that I have to reopen because at one point I needed to store books. So in front of me, Cosmic Influences on Human Behavior, the Planetary Factors and Personality, Dr. Michelle Gauquelin. This is from Aurora Press, the same company in New Mexico for many years, the great Barbara Summerfield, who I first met at the New York Astrology Center when I was getting into astrology in 1972-73. She worked with Henry Weingarten, who's still active. Barbara sadly passed back 7 years ago or so. Aurora Press still is active. They published Dane Rudyard's great books like Astrology of Personality, Person-Centered Astrology, The Lunation Cycle, and 3 classics by Dr. Mark Emmon Jones, Sabian Symbols in Astrology, Astrology, How and Why It Works, and Horary Astrology. Meanwhile, they also published this book, which is all the statistical stuff. On the cover, this is just sitting here. Okay, normally this book is somewhere else. And it shows, Wayne, a picture of Mars, the only planet on the cover, in an arc moving from the rising point of a chart from statistics to the upper culmination. And it's not showing Saturn, it's not showing Jupiter, it's just showing Mars. And I'll just read from the back of the top. This is a quote from Hans Eysenck. I know he's somewhere in the astrology field.
Eysenck, he's a major psychiatric doctor at the University of London, and he wrote a book to support the Mars effect. Yes.
Okay, and here's his quote from the back cover of this book. I'm recommending Wayne's book, The War Impulse Pattern. You will see it in GPS Astrology with his article about the GPS, Global Positioning Satellite System, and so many other things with astrolocality, astrocartography with an R in a circle. Here's the quote. It's very short. From the top of the back cover of this great book from Aurora Press, Cosmic Influences on Human Behavior, the Planetary Factors and Personality, Dr. Michelle Gauquelin. And the quote is, emotionally, I would prefer Gauquelin's results do not hold, but rationally, I must accept that they do. That's what they chose, Barbara Summerfield, to put on the back cover. And then there's a whole thing that, again, shows in miniature the front cover, which, Wayne, only Mars is showing. And you and I know that he did all this research, like Jupiter would be, like near the ascendant for writers. Then there's a whole thing about Saturn and doctors, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? He went into all of these things because, like you said, over there in Europe, they had a lot of statistics we didn't have. And, astrology is much more, the history of it is from America is short. It's 200 plus years. And in Europe, we're going back, 2,000 years, and certainly to at least 800, that the crowning of Charlemagne, which is a chart I always focus on, Christmas Day in Rome at noon, crowning of Charlemagne, Holy Roman Emperor, as Barbara Waters in a book oddly called Sex and the Outer Planets, she wrote this thing and said, we have 2 charts for civilizations. One is for European civilization, and she uses that chart. And the other one is the Islamic civilization, goes back to Muhammad entering Medina, or it's like 500 plus AD. And there's a specific day and so on. I've used both of those charts a whole lot. Back to you.
Well, Mark, it's funny. And the fact that you have a copy of Francosi's book, again, for our listeners, Francosi was the wife and the partner in crime for Michel Gauquelin. And they are both co-authors of the books. Now, I used to write Francois and Michel separately, and I didn't realize that they were having some issues in their relationship, especially over credit. Just like, you hear the backstory about Einstein and some other famous people. But anyway, so I wrote her a letter, and in the letter I wasn't giving due respect, and she wrote me a letter back. She was down with Neil Mickelson at the time, having him do some calculations for her. And she wrote a letter back to me, and she said, are you a male chauvinist? Why would you give credit to my husband and not acknowledge me? And so, that lady has lots of Mars in her personality. She has some chutzpah.
Let me show another thing. This is amazing because we're doing this on the fly. The forward to this particular book, according to this is not the original work of Dr. Michel Gauquelin or his wife's separate work. This is sort of a different work, maybe that came around later, a compendium. The forward is by, some of you will understand this if you're into ETs, UFOs, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind from 1977 by Steven Spielberg. J. Allen Hynek, the chairman of the Department of Astronomy, Northwestern University, not far from where you came from, at least birth-wise, and around the center of the country there. I won't give it all away. Sometime you can share more. J. Allen Hynek made it, he's a controversial figure. Some people in the UFO ET field, at some point, but in Close Encounters, at the very end, Devil's Tower, and we get this whole thing of the spaceship landing, and Richard Dreyfuss is seeing, which affected my life enormously. I'll talk about it another time after Findhorn, or part of my Findhorn experience. That movie came out in New York City. I brought all these Findhorn people. I saw the movie like 5 times over 2 weeks. It was playing only in Manhattan. Near the end, a pipe-smoking J. Allen Hynek shows up on Devil's Tower, and they just put him in for a couple of moments. That's it, because he was part of the whole thing. Wait a minute.
Mark, wait a minute. Yeah. You mean that this guy's name is mentioned in her book?
No, it's his book. It's the Gauquelin book. The forward of this particular book, Cosmic Influences Human Behavior, the forward has, get this, there's a little quote. This is by J. Allen Hynek as the forward of this particular book. First of all, he starts off with a quote from Johannes Kepler, who, again, we talk about all the time.
Mark, this is too much. This is too much.
I know this is all happening. He's the one, by the way, folks, in my astrology cosmic calendar, as opposed to, say, if you got the Llewellyn calendar, any of these things, you're not seeing quintiles of 72 degrees. You're not seeing some of these aspects that I put in, sesquiquadrate, 135, or 45-degree aspects, which are octiles, 1/8 of the circle. That's why a lot of you should get the Astrology Cosmic Calendar, which is free 1 day at a time or pennies by subscription. Here's the foreword by J. Allen Hynek, just a quote from Johannes Kepler. No man should hold it to be incredible that out of the astrologer's foolishness and blasphemies, some useful and sacred knowledge may come. Quote from Johannes Kepler. He's the one who gave us the idea of the planets going around not in a circle, right? In an ellipse. Yes? Johannes Kepler. Johannes Kepler came up with that idea, and then it was expounded upon by Sir Isaac Newton.
Oh, you're looking for agreement? Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And then he starts off, J. Allen Hynek, after that quote, Kepler's words might well apply to the results of the life work of the Gauquelins, plural. For a quarter of a century or so, they have worked in a scientifically forbidden, quote-unquote, field and have succeeded, I'm not going to read the whole thing, and have succeeded not only in demonstrating the astrologers' foolishness and blasphemies, unquote, but what is far more important, have demonstrated through discovery that something of great potential usefulness is inherent in it. Now, look.
Did he really use the word blasphemy?
Yes, I'm not making this up. And look, the wonderful Barbara Summerfield, bless her soul, I wanted to have, she did an interview of Dane Rudhyar for his 80th birthday or whatever it was. We published it, and I was trying to get in touch with the Aurora Press. She passed away sadly, and this is really weird. On August 11th, 7 years ago, the very date that I've chosen on the full moon. This has to do with
goodness.
Yeah, I didn't know this until 2 days ago because I wanted to actually, in fact, Katya, who is designing this beautiful GPS astrology, my daughter, has a friend who is able to take articles from Welcome Planet Earth or anywhere else, and I make a picture of it. I didn't even know this technology existed. I guess it's existed for a while. And you can take the picture and send it to somebody, and they can convert that into a document file, like for Word, Microsoft Word or whatever it is. So I sent.
Hey, Mark. Yeah. We're in extra innings right now. I want you to know.
I know we're in an hour. Folks, we may have to cut this thing off. By the way, my phone is charged. How's your phone?
Oh, my phone's fine, but you're a New Yorker, okay. And folks, you know what these New Yorkers mean when they say, "Wait, give me a minute." You know what they mean.
That's an hour, New York time. Well, look, we do need to wrap things up just for our energy fields and everything else happening today because GPS Astrology, where Brother Wayne and myself are going to appear, and all these other great authors. But the final thought about Barbara Summerfield, the irony there is Dane Rudhyar was my main male teacher. He is a sun sign Aries. My dad was a sun sign Aries. Eleanor Bach, who brought us the asteroids, particularly in 1973, the ephemerides of the asteroids, as she called it, was Ceres, Pallas, Athena, Juno, and Vesta. She became my more physical teacher. She lived in Lower Manhattan. And when I got into astrology, right at the time her book came out, she had a home in the Chelsea area around 23rd Street, and I was one of wonderful students to go to her place with other students. She baked us cookies. My chart is very connected with her. Her sun sign is Capricorn, exactly the day of my mother's birth, 3 years to the day later. And I didn't even think about this. I get a chill when I think about it. Over all the years, I knew that Dane Rudhyar was the main male astrologer. That's how I got into astrology, reading all his books. His Mercury and my Mercury are exactly the same degree. Eleanor has Jupiter in Libra rising, and I have Jupiter in Aquarius rising, and our Jupiters are exactly trine each other. So I want to recommend to everybody, and I'm sure you would say the same thing, a lot of the astrologers who, by the way, I have 36 classes in the School of Planetary Studies. If you want to get into learning astrology, it's back on the Great Bear Enterprise website. I started out with a small group of students back in 1985. And they were on cassette tape, they went to CDs, and then luckily my daughters made them into MP3 files. But the reason I bring this up is, you know what's important, folks, and particularly any of you who are into astrology, doing your own charts, look up, if you can, the master astrologers, the men and women, if you can find them. Often, and you'll tell me, there's Astro Data Bank by Lois Rodden, where people can put in the name Dane Rudhyar horoscope or Eleanor Bach horoscope or whoever, and often they don't always have an exact chart. It could be letter A or AA, which is birth certificate. They might say B or DD for dirty data, but at least you'll get sort of the month, day, and year and place for these people. And then you can look up your favorite astrologers, okay, and see the connections of their charts to yours, and then get into things like we're talking about today, out of bounds, where's Mars, and so on.
Hey, brother, I couldn't agree with you more. At some point it must be, and here the two of us have been going through this with great intensity this summer, but actually we've been working it up for the last couple of years during the lockdown of the pandemic. But astrologers, after decades, we must be like them caterpillars, and we metamorphose into flying flowers, and in this sense, out of bounds flying flowers. So this way of walking into a room and seeing a book that's relevant and, looking at TV and hearing a word that's relevant, or the person sends you a text message and it ties in. Look, it happens all the time, and it's just the way we see the world.
By the way, let me just mention one other thing here, and then we can start closing down, but I want you to have the final word, and then we'll end for today. We were talking earlier about, and this came up from yesterday's, where Wayne shared about Jim Thorpe, 1907, so on. By the way, the first Balkan Wars were 1906 to 1908, so there were other things happening that led to World War I, and you were mentioning the launching of the Lusitania, but then the Lusitania, I saw a show recently, there were about 1,600 people who died on the Lusitania or so.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the catalysts to get America into the war. Now, meanwhile, in the Virgo and Libra 1987 issues, and Wayne and I were talking about this earlier, and I sent him a picture of the cover where I was getting into the declinations of stars. And so I'm going to do a podcast on this, folks. I'm not going to get into it now, but the same thing that Wayne was introducing, how far planets and the sun and moon are north or south of the celestial equator, what we call declination. In the cover of the Libra 87 issue, where Wayne has an article on international banking, and I was writing about what was called stars over cities, celestial seasons for planet Earth, I had my artist do sort of a square map of the world with cities and all the key stars that are what we call zenith stars. Because one of the things that this brings up, Wayne was talking about, is it's not just planets that have arcs that are north and south by declination from the celestial equator, but the stars that we call the fixed stars that don't move very much, they actually do move a little bit, but they're generally fixed. The ancients didn't know that because they didn't have the telescopes, but they do have a slow motion. Nevertheless, there are particular stars that are incredibly powerful. And as I said to you earlier today when I sent you a chart with the fixed stars for today, I explained that if we go back to the nuclear axis, which is the first nuclear chain reaction that I consider the birth of the atomic age, December 2nd of 42, Enrico Fermi in Chicago, first nuclear controlled reaction. The stars, what are called these red giant stars, Antares, the heart of the Scorpio constellation, and Aldebaran, the heart of the Taurus constellation, not the sign, but the constellation, they have moved on through what's called precession of the equinox. So those two stars, which are part of my study on nuclear, literally now, today, when these events just happened in Ukraine at the big nuclear plant there, and people can read the story of rockets being fired. This is not Chernobyl in the north of Ukraine. It's the other one in the south that's actually bigger. And there's all this worry and danger. We'll get into this another time, but it literally happened today. And these two red giant stars are exactly to the minute of arc, not a degree or what we call a major orb. This is like minute change, activating the sun placement, the life force, when Enrico Fermi and his team sort of had the first controlled nuclear reaction in Chicago, December 2nd, 1942. And this just happened today. Actually, since in the last 5 or 6 hours, as Brother Wayne and I have been going back and forth before we even did this. So those two issues, Virgo of 87, Wayne Moody wrote this fantastic piece about Pluto, what we call the Twilight Zone, the United States Pluto. If you move through astrolocality, it turns out it goes through the Persian Gulf. This is a lead for future out of bounds because we do have to end pretty soon here. But just to show folks, 35 years ago in Welcome to Planet Earth, over 2 issues, we were sharing about things at the time of the harmonic convergence. And after the Libra issue came out, was the stock market crash literally a couple of weeks later. And you had just written about the international monetary banking situation in the previous issue. And I was talking about stars, including that Algol, which is a double star system, an eclipsing star, considered the most challenging one in the sky historically, is exactly overhead in New York City. And that's where the stock market then crashed right after the issue came out, when you were also talking about international banking.
Well, Mark, I have something to add, and this will be my closing contribution because of what you just said. So what else happened in 1907? in 1907, there was the Panic of 1907, which began in October 22nd.
Oh, wow.
And it was a bank run on New York's Knickerbocker Trust Company. And by the 24th of October, it had gotten so bad and everybody was so scared that they went to J.P. Morgan, Harriman, Stillman, Frick, and other Wall Street financiers to create a pool, which at that time was $25 million. Think TARP. Think 2008. Think $700 billion. Think TARP. And so what Mark and I have been discussing for some time now is the United States has its Mars return occurring this year. So that's important for me because I'm getting my Mars return early in Gemini, and then the United States will have its Mars return afterwards, and then it goes retrograde for 6 months. Well, we're getting in weeds here with this, but what's important is that we have a historical fact that we have to deal with, and that was that when Mars was extremely out of bounds, and Mars in the U.S. chart is returning, anyway, that we had a situation where there was a financial crash of significance that required a TARP-like rescue plan. So I'm looking right now. I have done the Mars return for the United States, and I'm looking at it to see what the declination is. I don't know it. I'm just looking it up. And it says Mars is going to return on October 4th of 2022.
The first Mars of three, right?
Huh?
There'll be two more later.
Yeah, there'll be more later. It'll go from October for 6 months into 2023. But I'm looking for the declination, and Mars is out of bounds. No, it's not.
But it will be afterwards. It'll be like
it
November,
will be
December,
afterwards.
January.
On that date, it's at 2238. It's got to get to 2326 to be out of bounds. So I guess what you see, astrologers try to make. Look, you take information and you take an idea and you take a revelation, and then it leads to something. Just like Mark's walking around his house bumping into Francois Gauquelin's book with Mars on the cover. I mean, it's amazing how our instincts, our intuition, whatever you want to call it, our tuned-inness, nowadays politically correct to say to be woke. I've got people fighting in the audiences now. But what I'm saying is 1907 was the great Knickerbocker crash. You don't hear much about that because we've had worse ones. But they had to implement a TARP-like rescue plan for the country. I don't know if this was an international thing or not, whether or not the United States was that important in international finance. But I can say this, to be forewarned is to be forearmed.
By the way, I just put up October 22nd, 1907, Panic of 1907. I looked briefly because I got the computer in front of me. The Wikipedia was talking a little bit about from the 14th of October through November 6th. It was a couple of weeks. So I don't want to say 100% that the October 22nd date, maybe that's the middle point of all this, but I want to say one thing about what I'm looking at in the chart for 1 second, because it connects up to an asteroid, Vesta, one of the four main asteroids that Eleanor Bach brought to us, the fourth one to be discovered, in my research for 50 years now, is enormously connected to money, to insurance, to investment. And Eleanor Bach explained that. She wrote a whole series of articles. She had something called Planet Watch and all these other things that she did. And by the way, one of her articles on Vesta, this is a remarkable thing, is going to be in this GPS astrology issue. She passed, bless her soul, in 1995. So that's 27 years ago. And I was looking back at an issue, and I saw on the cover, the bottom of the cover of Walk Planet Earth, Vesta in Pisces by Eleanor Bach. And I thought, wait a minute, Vesta's in Pisces now. The four main asteroids have a 4 to 5 year cycle. Anyway, I opened the article and I start reading it, and I realized, oh my God, I would love Eleanor Bach to be in this issue. She meant so much to me. Well, here Wayne brings up, as we're closing, a panic of 1907, the same year was the whole thing with Jim Thorpe, launching of the Lusitania, Jim Thorpe meeting Eisenhower, the key person before he becomes president.
Who says that Jim Thorpe is the greatest athlete he's ever seen and ever competed against? Eisenhower, future American president. Right, and the sun is in Libra, which is Eisenhower's sun sign, in October of 1907. Eisenhower, I think, was born in, I don't want to fly too fast with this, I think he was born in 1895, somewhere in that. He would have been a youngster then. But Vesta is with the conjunct North Node, okay, and this would have been during the main part of the crisis, and if it did start a couple of days before October 22nd, the Wikipedia says October 14th, then the North Node, which is a fate destiny point, at 18 plus a Cancer, would be exactly conjunct Vesta. All I can tell you, folks, is in addition to, every planet has a financial energy depending on its nature and depending on where it is in a birth chart, second house of personal finance, eighth house having to do with other people's money, and so on and so forth. But Vesta, of the four main asteroids, Ceres, Pallas, Athena, Juno, and Vesta, is so connected to financial realities, particularly investment planning, insurance coverage, safety and security, home and hearth, soul sister energies, so many other things. We'll talk about all the asteroids and Chiron and other planets, another time. But this is just an example. Thank goodness I'm sitting at a computer going off of your lead and seeing that we see Vesta there. By the way, on the date you're talking about, the moon was right in the middle of Taurus, of course, the key financial sign on that date, and there's a bunch of other things. Maybe at some point we'll get into this particular time period more, because for some reason 1907 seems like it's a starting point for a lot of what we're talking about here. Hey, there we go.
Okay.
Out of bounds. Once more.
Well, and eventually we'll bring in a little bit of Jerry Seinfeld, because to give us the title, I was thinking, and folks, I love the Jerry Seinfeld show, but I haven't followed his latest thing, which is comedians getting coffee. I mean, when you're a multi-billionaire, I guess you need to do another show to sort of add on. But, the guy is a comic genius, and so on. That show went on for 9 years on NBC. But that gave us the at least to both of us, aside from Out of Bounds, two guys talking astrology and sports, at least in my mind, sort of was connected to the idea of comedians getting coffee. You know what I mean? Kind of a cool title that Jerry Seinfeld, I guess it's on HBO, wherever it is. I've never actually, I saw like 2 minutes of one episode. So, but I know Wayne and I both have a lot of laughs with this. At the same time, these topics are also very serious. So again, Wayne Moody, look for him, GPS Astrology, his book, War Impulse Pattern. You'll see that in there. His article on GPS, the actual global positioning satellites, connected to this concept of the Great Bear, the Pleiades and Sirius. When you see the cover of GPS Astrology, I'm in there, many other astrologers. There's a whole sort of tour de force. And whatever we talk about with the next Out of Bounds, we'll see you all then. So can you say something to sign off?
Hey, those New York fans need to be more disciplined. I hear that they were rioting and breaking people's arms the other day on the baseball field. What do you have to say about that, New Yorker Mark Lerner?
Well, that was in Queens, which is where I was born, the New York Mets, and they're doing pretty well. Right now there could be a Subway Series, but we'll see, because often these teams fade away. But right now the Yankees and the Mets are both leading their divisions. We'll see what happens.
All right.
So listen, love and blessings to you. Have a great evening. We've made a great start, I think, and we'll just see where it all goes. And by the way, folks, hopefully you'll hear some opening music from my daughter, Katya Juliet Lerner, and some closing music, and she's the orchestrator of wherever this is going to go. And we both want to thank her enormously and thank all of you for listening.
Well,
So,
one thing we do know is it's going to be bounds.
For sure. So have a great evening, everybody, whenever you get to listen to it. And remember to subscribe to GPS Astrology, which is an online magazine. More about that also on the website, my website, greatbearenterprises.com. And do you have a blog of yours that you can say on the air or no?
No, that's a work in progress. I have to decide where I go.
To get Wayne's at the full moon of August 11th, that's whether it's the end of the day, start looking for GPS, the letter G as in good, and the letter P as in Pythagoras and Pallas, and the letter S as in the star Sirius, okay, or Shambhala, that letter GPS, like global positioning satellite, but connected to the supernal triangle of the Great Bear, the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, part of the Great Bear constellation. The Pleiades, the 7 stars, there's actually 9 or 11 of those, but they're often called the 7 sisters. And Sirius, which, by the way, has a companion star. It's not just Sirius, which is the brightest star about 8+ light years away, is so famous in terms of ancient Egypt. It's conjunct, its zodiac position, particularly back in 1942, exactly conjunct the U.S. sun from July 4th, 1776, in the sign Cancer, when we sort of moved through precession of the equinox. So look for Wayne's stuff in GPS Astrology, my stuff in there, and so many other great astrologers and non-astrologers. So we're ending today. Love and blessings from both of us, and thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Hey, Mark, how do they end ball games in New York? Did somebody say something?
Ain't over till it's over, my friends. Let's end with the Yogi Berra. Okay, we're both signing off, and we'll probably call each other for a couple of moments after, before our dinners have to be prepared. Okay, so we're signing off now, folks. Take good care. Bye for now.